Preteens everywhere are disappearing. Not literally, of course, but in the sense that it's hard to find somebody who's 8 that acts like they're 8. When you think of a preteen, your mental image might differ from mine. When I think of a preteen, I typically think of someone who's around 8 to 12 and in the time period of growth that we all go through. In my experience, our preteen years are marked less by how old you are and more by how you act. From making new friends, wearing new clothes that, in hindsight, might have been a little dorky, and trying to act like the cool kids and begging your parents for the latest and greatest, being a preteen has always been an awkward time of change, rooted in wanting to be your own person. But lately, tweens have seemed to skip that awkward phase of self-growth and head straight for the big leagues, acting more like teenagers or even grown adults, and it doesn't seem to be good for them. In this speech, I want to tell you about why the preteen of today is so much different from the tween of yesteryears, why this trend in behavior isn't good for them in the long run, and what we can do to help our preteens be the best versions of themselves. First, we have to talk about the why of all this, because we can't start to talk about a problem without addressing why it's happening. So, why are the preteens of today so different and seemingly so much more mature than before? One of the big culprits is social media. More than ever, we are seeing the effect that social media is having on socialization. Think back to when you were littler, maybe just starting 7th grade and seeing a really cool kid walking down the hallway. Did you want to be like them? Did you want to wear what they did? I know a lot of people did. Social media gives these kids access to the cool kids all the time through people like influencers or celebrities. Now, you might be thinking all the time is a bit of an exaggeration, but according to the National Library of Medicine, up to 95% of youths aged 13 through 17 report using a social media platform, with more than a third saying they use social media almost constantly. Although 13 is the common minimum age used by social media platforms in the US, nearly 40% of children ages 8 through 12 use social media. That sort of numbers are bound to have an impact on how they socialize and their behavior. For example, those influencers they look up to now, well, they can so easily replicate what they do instead of kids their age, and the influencers themselves are, well, influencing them to do just that. This is the key factor that I think often gets overlooked in conversations about how social media is impacting our youth. These kids are more likely to model their behavior off of grown adults on the internet trying to sell them things instead of kids their age or role models in their community. Now, that was a lot about social media. But throughout all of that, you might have asked yourself another good question starting with why? That being, why are so many kids today turning to social media? The answer is a lot simpler than you think. They just have nowhere else to go, and social media is always just a tap away. Think about the last time you saw a Claire's store, or a Justice. Even Abercrombie & Fitch was on the ropes before it shifted their brand to tailor to an older audience. Stores like I just listed across America are increasingly shutting down, and what did these stores all have in common? Their target audience was always preteens and younger kids. It was a space for them to go and socialize. But most of that space is simply not available to them anymore. For example, in 2025, that store I listed earlier, Claire's filed for bankruptcy and almost closed entirely. Now, only 850 to 950 of their previous 1,350 locations are still open. The one closest to me is an hour away and in a very empty mall. But maybe you can remember a time when malls across America were the hottest place for teens and preteens. But with the rise of online shopping, even malls have been slowly dying. In an article from Capital One Banking in 2025, the United States is home to an estimated 1,200 malls, and projections indicate that 87% of them will close in 10 years. But you might be wondering about other hangout spots. What about bowling alleys, or arcades, or roller rinks? Unfortunately, it seems that they too face the same grim fate as malls. According to an estimate from Brightscraper, only 924 roller rinks remain active in the U.S., and 3,785 bowling alleys are still active. After examining some of the reasons why preteens today are behaving differently, let's look at some of why this trend of behavior doesn't seem to be good for them. To do that, I've taken a look at some recent mental health statistics for preteens ages 8 through 12. If the rates of mental health issues were going down, that would indicate a positive trend, right? But that's not what I found. What I found was a dramatic rise in mental health issues. According to an article published by the CDC, suicide is the second leading cause of death in kids ages 10 through 14. And according to another article published by the World Health Organization, 1 in 7 kids, or 14.3% of kids ages 10 through 19, experience mental health issues. Now, some of you might start to wonder if these numbers are really as big as they seem. If the problem I seem to be presenting, a preteen mental health crisis, is even real. To really put the rise of mental health issues into perspective, I've dug even deeper and found some older statistics to compare to these new ones. Going back to the suicide rate, provided in an article by the CDC once again, from 2009 to 2019, the age-adjusted suicide rate has increased from 11.8 per 1,000 people to 13.9. But those numbers are including everyone. An article from the National Institute of Mental Health reports that the suicide rate has been increasing by approximately 8% since 2008 for preteens ages 8 through 12. And another topic that's less talked about, self-harm and the people that it affects, well, since 2009, 5 times more 10 through 14-year-olds were admitted to the ER for self-harm in 2022. Some of those kids are in 4th grade. Now that we've established that this trend of behavior is negative, let's come up with some ways that we can help our preteens be the best, healthiest versions of themselves. First things first, kids need time away from social media and off their screens. And they need a place to be when they're off those screens. Those high rates of suicide I just talked about, researchers suspect that they might stem from social media. Having analyzed 4 years of data from a large study of US ages 10 through 14, they concluded that addictive use of phones, social media, and video games is commonplace and is associated with 2 to 3 times higher rates of suicidal ideation by age 14, as well as other mental health problems. But like earlier, we run into the problem of where these kids can go to hang out, if not over text, over call, or video game lobbies. Since so many spaces tailored to kids and preteens are disappearing or shutting down across America, it leaves them with nowhere to go but those phones. For this reason, I think a good first step to helping our preteens to start opening up is more places for these preteens. They don't have to be stores, but these kids need to have somewhere to go, a place to be kids. But of course, I can tell you what to do all I want. I can tell you that overusing technology is bad for preteens. I can tell you all about how their evolving behavior is indicative of real problems with them, but I can't force change. Change has to come from the people around them, from friends to, most importantly, family. The parents of today need to step up and properly support their kids. So, dear parents, limit the screen time your preteen has. Talk with them, ask them about their day. Let them know that you love them just as they are. These parents need to take firm action with their kids. And that has to come from those parents and their desire to help their kids. It can't come from me. In this speech, we've discussed why preteens of today seem so different from the preteens of even 5 or 10 years ago, established that this change in behavior seems to be a negative change in terms of mental health, and how we can help support our preteens into being the best versions of themselves. To close this out, I want to ask you a couple of questions. How many preteens need to call out for help before we answer? How many of those calls never even get heard? How many more 4th graders do we need to lower into caskets because we decided that their problems weren't big enough to step in? This situation isn't hopeless. Like I've said throughout this speech, being a preteen is a time of change. Let's make it a good change.
9 minutes, 54 seconds.